All right, well, let's talk about the broader implications of this. I mean, you mentioned Oklahoma. I saw a piece today that that said teachers in Arizona now are contemplating a strike and have cited what's gone on in West Virginia. What is if this wants to be if other unions across the country are anticipating what's going to happen with Janus, and that they're going to be they're going to have a lot of and there's subsidiary complications to as Janus we'll see what happens as it's ruled on, but assuming that they're going to be stripped of agency fees, but for those people who want to voluntarily pay them, like if they were emulating what went on in West Virginia, how would they go about doing it? Is it just simply the membership has just got to decide to go walk off, or was there some sort of like larger plan that led up to this moment?
Well, I think there was a larger plan that led up to this moment. They had been talking about this for some time, and also you have to consider West Virginia history, which is that there is a history of mass-scale walkouts. In 1990, all the teachers walked out on strike. In 1969, over 40,000 coal miners went on a legal wildcat strike for black lung benefits. So there is a history of this in West Virginia that runs very deep, that they were able to draw on. Some of these other states, there's not quite the same type of history where people have that, fond memory of militancy. But that's not to say that it won't happen. There obviously has to be a fair amount of planning. There's a fair amount of planning laid here. But at the same time, when you look at a result, when 80% of teachers in Oklahoma say they want to strike and they go out and do it, that does say something, if they go out and pull that off. Because when people get involved in a strike is when they really learn what a strike's like. I mean, I've been involved. I've covered labor disputes. I was also a shop steward at Politico and was legally fired in the union drive. You can theorize about labor struggles, but until you actually get involved in one and you're faced with the daily crises of maintaining a picket line and maintaining strength on a picket line, all that planning means very little until you get to that point, because that's when people really start to find out what they're made of.
I mean, what on the ground, like what did that look like? I mean, maintaining that picket line.
Well, I think it was tough, and I think part of the reason they wanted to go back in is when you get beyond about 2 weeks. The first week of the picket line, everybody's all excited. They're out banging drums, they're out dancing, people are dropping off food. Everybody's having a good time. They're taking time off work. People are shooting the shit. And that first week on a picket line is always a lot of fun, but when you start getting into that second week, that people don't quite have the same energy to be standing outside, shouting the same chants as they always do. People, so there was a battle to maintain morale. And, I think they were able to pull it off to a large degree. Obviously it wasn't as much energy as the early days. But as, maintaining a strike for a long period of time, look, I've covered lockouts that go on for 14 months. After 14 months, picket line duty becomes sitting in a lawn chair,
right,
on the picket line, with some signs. So I think part of the calculus here in going back in is how much longer can you maintain, and it's better at this point to bring the union back in without having the strike being broken than to keep going when you still keep the risk of potentially striking again in October or at some other date if you don't get the changes to PEIA that they want. And this is important to bring up. Under traditional union contract, if you strike in the middle of the union contract, that's illegal. You could be fined a ton of money under the National Labor Relations Act. But since they don't have a union contract, they're in a bit more of a gray area. They can strike whenever they want.
Huh. That's interesting. So the absence of some of the protections that one would get as a union also, I guess, don't constrain them in the same way. Let me ask you this.
For instance, and let me bring this up.
Please.
In October, the beginning of October, this task force set up by the state, including teachers union representatives, will present its plan on how to fix the state health insurance program, PEIA. if that doesn't get voted on or isn't moving in the state legislature, teachers could go out on strike again to force the issue in the media right before the election. So, it is maintaining that sense of strike and not wanting to drag this out longer and risk an injunction when you might not get much more from the state legislature, which is an important dynamic here.
I mean, you bring up the election. I mean, how do you square this this history of of union militancy? How do you square the success of this strike with the fact that West Virginia is, basically is Trump country? That Democrats, I think, not since Mike Dukakis, have won in that state. What accounts for that? If you have a sense,
they actually haven't won in the state since NAFTA. And I would say NAFTA and other deals like that played a large role in it. The decline of those places, because there was a coalition there for a long time of union populist voters. And when the Democratic Party started getting away from its populist message, when the message started to become, well, you can get job retraining, blah, 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 people got really turned off in those parts, particularly given the fact that at the same time that jobs were leaving, evangelicalism was sneaking in more and more. And there really has been a rise in evangelicism in these areas as times get more desperate. So you're seeing that dynamic. But I also think, you do have to ask, there's been racism in those areas and racism in the past, but also the willingness of certain groups of actors to play off that racism. I mean, in the 90s, we really changed the conversations of the Democratic Party from economic populism to vilifying black people and locking them up at record rates. And so, what sense did that make for the Democratic Party in a place like West Virginia to get into a debate about who's going to lock up more black people and just abandon all the economic populism, right? It didn't really serve the interests too well to create a more racist conversation while taking away the populist conversation. And so you see weird things there. I mean, you have this guy, Richard Ojeda, who's running for Congress, who's become this viral internet star. And I really refer to Richard Ojeda as the George Wallace of West Virginia. I mean, that's the kind of ambition he has and the kind of bullshitter he is. I mean, this is a guy who told the New Yorker, Ojeda, he's a state senator, told the New Yorker when he was running for state senate 2 years ago that he voted for Trump as a Democrat because he was tired of, quote, illegal aliens coming here and taking all the benefits. Just promoting these outright lies that undocumented workers can even get access to government benefits. I mean, here you have someone doubling down on the racism and trying to present the economic populism. So I think this is an opening. I think it's an opening for the movement to start talking about issues of race. But we have to be careful who are the leaders. Like this Richard Ojeda guy who's, gotten a big profile in Politico and all these other places. They mentioned that he might have voted for Trump and, he feels bad about it. But, just a year and a half ago, he was giving racist comments to the New Yorker about how, he didn't think immigrants should get benefits. That's one thing if you're an average voter, but if you want to run for Congress and paint yourself as a hero, and should be given, this guy's videos, they went really viral doing this as a state senator, His videos were getting 200, 300,000 views. And this guy, sort of launched himself into the national media spotlight, tried to, but, there, among some of the progressive types on the left, he's still seen as a charlatan because he's willing to say this race-baiting shit about Mexicans.
Interesting.
So it brings up some interesting threads, and I bring up the immigration standpoint because I do feel that immigration is the Selma issue of our times. It is the civil rights issue of our times. And we've seen too many people in these Rust Belt districts run away from immigration right here in Pennsylvania. In PA 18, this special election that's happening next week, the Democrat won't talk about immigration at all. He calls for more border security, which we just know is just racist language and bullshit.
And I mean, and so, and is Ojeda he has been also championing this strike too? Is that right?
Yeah.
So there are.
Have you seen much about this guy? There was a huge profile in Politico magazine of him.
Now that you mention him, I remember. And he also, there was some weird thing where he got beat up before the last election or something.
Yeah.
Am I imagining that? Like I remember this guy.
No, that happened. He got beat up by a guy.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know why that sticks in my mind, but it was a weird story, and he was, yes, his name pops up from time to time. I mean, I guess that is the sort of the dichotomy in these areas, and you're talking about Conor Lamb, right? Is the special election for in next week in I guess around your parts there.